You're watching the YouTube version of the We Are Innovation podcast. Join us as we explore how innovation, new technologies, and human creativity improve our lives. The future is calling.
Hi, I'm Federico Fernández. Welcome to a new episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the Digital Nomads Tax Freedom Index. And for that, we have the best person to talk about this because it's the author, basically the person behind it, who is María Alejandra Londoño. María Alejandra leads the training department at Liberty International, where she also serves as research lead for their Digital Nomads Tax Freedom Initiative. A finance and international trade graduate with honors, she brings over 7 years of experience advising businesses across various sectors. Her work focuses on building engaged communities and conducting data-driven research on global mobility, with extensive experience facilitating international events across multiple continents. You can find more about María Alejandra on the Liberty International website. I'm going to leave a link to that, and also to the Digital Nomads Tax Initiative, and to a document that she wrote about the tax freedom, the Digital Nomad Tax Freedom Index itself. María Alejandra, welcome to the We Are Innovation podcast.
Federico, thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be here having this conversation with you. Thank you also for the introduction.
Thank you very much. I never do justice to people's bios, but I try to keep it relatively short, because if not, I think it's quite boring, and people can go to Liberty International to find out more about you, and also to find out about the work you're doing with them, which is amazing. The first question I want to ask you, which has to do, I anticipated we're going to talk mostly about the Digital Nomad Tax Freedom Index and the initiative that you're running. And I want to ask you, what was the inspiration behind the creation of the Digital Nomad Tax Freedom Index? And why do you think it's important to develop a tool like this?
Well, the inspiration for this index was in the making for a couple years. I first started collaborating with Liberty International in 2019. I met the team and Jacek, the president, in Mongolia under Liberty International World Conference. This is a conference that at Liberty International we make every year in a different part of the world. Back then, I was not a digital nomad, but I was very interested by the concept. And I met them in Mongolia, and then we collaborated on a couple of events. As you mentioned, then I started traveling and I embraced this digital nomad lifestyle. I think at its core, it's a very freedom-driven lifestyle, because it's saying like, you know what, I'm going to be free from absolutely everything that is constraining me on my home place, and just traveling, seeing the world, meeting people that were also like-minded, and trying to find that freedom in everything that they did. I was first the director of the libertarian movement here in Colombia, so I knew all the ideas of freedom and liberty and free markets. But then on my own personal journey, I found the digital nomads were also very driven by freedom, and maybe they weren't politically libertarians, but on their ways, they were seeking that liberty as well. So I started doing that. I reunited myself with Liberty International a year ago with Jacek, and then I was just sharing some of these experiences, and then he was also having certain questions about the tax situation, taxation, mobility, tax freedom, and that's how we ended up saying like, hey, you know what, we should make an index to showcase this, how are countries behaving, and how is this phenomenon that now has become a buzzword, the whole digital nomad thing is like, and how can we understand better how this phenomenon is affecting legislations, and how countries and governments are viewing this lifestyle and these people who are traveling very freely. And of course, with like everything, the market is always 10 steps ahead of the government. So it has been a very interesting journey to learn more about this.
I want to go, of course, to the winners and the countries that have to do better, have room for improvement. But let's wait a little bit to unveil who's winning the index, so to speak. And before that, I want to go to the methodology. Because we at We Are Innovation, we have also worked in a couple of indexes, and the methodological question. The methodological part, I know it's not the most sexy, but it's extremely important, and it's what decides whether the index will be, let's say, reflecting reality properly or not. And I want to ask you, what was the rationale behind determining the relative weights, that are for each of the categories or the dimensions that you measure, which are tax rate, the easiness of getting a visa process, etc. How was that developed, and what was the rationale?
Wonderful. I'm gonna do my best to try and explain this without showing people the index, or because this is audio mainly. But you can go to the Liberty International website, and then you'll find the index, and you'll find a very nice map, heat map about the index and some other things that you can follow along if you're up to it. So we had this inspiration of saying, okay, we want to make this index about digital nomad tax freedom index. So we wanted to focus mainly on tax freedom. This started this whole research of saying, what are the best dimensions that we need to evaluate, and how are we going to define tax freedom for digital nomads? Something that people must know if they're not very familiar with digital nomads and the term is that these are people that travel the world, and they spend around 3 to 6 to up to a year in one place, but pretty much there's not like a proper home. So this is always challenging the normal conception that we have about taxes, because taxes and income tax and the taxes that you pay, they're always based on the place that you live, because we humans are used to staying on the same place for many years. So that's the taxation where it comes to taxation. Also, something important to know, the first time that the term digital nomad was used was in 1997 on a book by the same name of an author who was saying that in the future, humans will return to this nomadic lifestyle because of technology. You can put the link on the description of the podcast. I'll send everyone so you can have that. And he said that in the future, technology will allow humans to return to the roots of being nomadic. And he said, like, this is our nature. We cannot escape this nature, and this is what's going to happen in the future. But we as humans, we have built this modern society, and we have built democracies, and we have built countries, and all of this came with taxes as well, the tax structure. So we wanted to reflect on this index, how governments were viewing the phenomenon of digital nomads regarding taxes. So we first started evaluating like 10 dimensions. Between those, we were evaluating insurance, we were evaluating social security, how much was the cost of the visas. But then we had the fortune to have Per Weiland. He's a professor in Oklahoma. He's also part of the board of Liberty International. He came and he mentored me on the index, and he said, this needs to be more simple. We need to make this more simple. So we ended up having only the 4 dimensions that you now see. So we are evaluating tax rate and the residency. So again, we consider the average tax rate that an individual with a digital nomad visa faces if they become a tax resident. So here I'm gonna go a bit more into the theory, because this also opened my eyes in so many ways about the tax structure that we are living in. So again, we get taxed based on where we live, but a digital nomad has no home, no proper home. So it's difficult to follow how they pay taxes. So governments, what they have done is they open these visas where people enter the country to stay legally with this type of visas, and then they either become a tax resident or they don't become a tax resident. When you become a tax resident in another country rather than your home country, the country that you were born in, there's a lot of issues there that you have to see, that you will have to pay 2 taxes in different countries, or if there's a double taxation treaty, then it's like very intricate systems that depends on each country. So we said, like, we just want to see if they do become a tax resident on the country they're getting the visa, and how much is the tax rate if they enter with a digital nomad visa. I'm going to give you an example. For example, if you enter to Andorra in Europe, or if you enter, for example, Colombia, that's where I'm from, you'll have to pay around 15% tax rate with the digital nomad visa after 6 months, and that's when you become a tax resident. But then you have other countries, for example, like Malta, also in Europe, where you can enter and be up to a year and you do not become a tax resident, right? So that's the first dimension and the most important one on our index. Let me know, Federico, if this has been clear and if you're following me. But that will be the first dimension, tax rate and the tax residency. The second part is the visa process. This is more a qualitative dimension in which we assess whether the application is easy, can be completed 100% online, if the information is clear and accessible online. So for many of these visas, you will have to go to the embassy and present yourself. And for so many other of these visas, you can do the process 100% online. And if we're talking about digital nomads, of course, we want to make this process as easy as possible. So the countries that you can make this 100% online are the best ones, and the ones that have information very clear. Clear online is also, they rank higher. What we have found within this dimension is that, again, like bureaucracy and government, sometimes we don't know what's going on inside of their minds. But because this became a buzzword, we feel that also many countries came into the game to kind of like just have the visa to hop on the trend, but then the information and the qualifications that someone needs are not so clear online, and this makes the process much more difficult of applying, which end up of people and people like nomads that want to apply to these visas not applying to the visas because they're very difficult to get. So that's the second dimension, the visa process. The third dimension is income, and here we wanted to reflect also the accessibility, also showcasing that the digital nomads can be maybe a privileged lifestyle of being able to travel, leave your hometown, and so on. Not every country requires a really high income to access one of these visas. So this evaluates the minimum income required to apply for a visa, considering the lifestyle affordability and economic accessibility. In some countries, you only need to show $1,000 of income per month. In some other countries, to showcase $5,000, $7,000 of income. I really like this dimension because it shows that, well, this lifestyle might not be for everyone, but at least there are countries that might be more accessible than others, and that's important also to acknowledge. And the final dimension is the stay length. This evaluates for how long a person can stay with a digital nomad visa. Of course, at the core of this lifestyle is to be able to travel and to move around as much as you can. But in some cases with these visas, people can stay up to 2 years, 3 years, and then apply for a proper residency. We wanted to evaluate this also to showcase how long can you stay in a country that is being friendly with you and saying you don't have to pay any taxes here. So those are the 4 dimensions that we evaluate, and that's where the structure of the index comes from. The one that weights the more is of course, the tax rate. The one that weights the lesser is the stay length. If are your listeners and you, of course, want to know more into the details, they might not be so sexy and the numbers and so on our website, you can download the full report where I go into detail on how we make the calculations, what's the methodology itself. But the methodology is pretty simple. We just rank every dimension with an assigned percentage, and then we do the normalization and all of that fun stuff that you can read more about on our website.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra. This is, I mean, as you said, this is perhaps not the fun part of the index. The fun part comes in a second, but it's important, and thank you for being so clear and so transparent about what was, let's say, behind what was your way of thinking and how you like shrunk a little bit the things that you were going to measure. It's extremely interesting. I think, by the way, you did an amazing job. So really, and people should go take a look at the index, take a look at the explanation you give of the methodology, because I think it really makes sense. And well, now let's go to particularly, let's start with the winners, the countries that are doing very well. If I remember correctly, Ecuador is on it's number one, and Malta is number two. Of course, I mean, you explained us, with the methodology we can, let's say, guess where these countries are doing certain things well. But what are the specific? What is the specific attractiveness of the top 3-4 countries of the index? What are they doing right according to you?
We've ranked the top 5 and the bottom 5, and then we've found some really interesting data there. Most of the countries, I'll say, behave what we found overall with the index. Very interesting finding is that most of these countries are starting to behave on a free market logic. So what we're seeing is that they want to offer the best conditions for people to come to their countries. And then we see some other countries that they just had to offer the visa because they were getting floated with digital nomads. That might be the case of Portugal. And some of you, if you have been following the news, you know that the term gentrification has also been mentioned, and how digital nomads are maybe, not being so welcome in certain parts of Europe. But then if you see the Caribbean, many of these islands have embraced, as I said, this free market logic to attract this type of, we can call it tourism residents. So on the top 5, we have on the first place Ecuador. That was a surprise. They ranked the best because of the tax rate, the stay length, and also because of the income required that they needed. Malta was number 2. This was no surprise because Malta is really popular amongst digital nomads. Malta is this island in Europe, and it's under Italy. And it has a beautiful history, but it's usually an overlooked country. But it has lovely weather because it's in the Mediterranean, so the winters are not so harsh. It's really easy to get around, and it has been considered very friendly with taxes for companies and now for digital nomads. So it's a country that a lot of nomads flock to naturally because of the tax conditions that they get offered there, and also because the cost of living it's much lower than the rest of Europe. Then on the third place, we have Malaysia. This is a country in Asia, and it ranked really well because we have taxes and the income required. But then on the fourth place, we have Albania, and this was a very interesting case. Albania is a country in Europe that, again, it's always overlooked because it's tiny. It's not sexy, let's say. It is not so fun sometimes, but Albania has a really interesting case, and is that it ranked really well on all of the dimensions. The income, the stay length, and the visa process is so easy and so clear. Same as Malta. Malta is number 2, and I think that's the easiest process to apply for a digital nomad visa. But then Albania has a tax rate of 15%, and you become a tax resident right away. As soon as you get the visa, you enter the tax system. But because all of the other dimensions were so good, it ranks really high up under the index. And this also is sending the message that even if you have to pay a little bit of taxes on the income that you generate while you're in the country, you can still have really nice conditions. And I think that's also under the free market logic of understanding taxes, also a little bit different, of saying I'm paying this, but I'm also getting the service that I need. And from we did some informal interviews with nomad communities, and in some of those conversations, this person lived in Estonia. Estonia is ranking lower on the index, but he said that he was happy to pay the tax that he needed to pay while he was there because he felt that he was able, the road worked really nicely. I think he got access to the health system, and he was like, I'm happy to pay for this because I'm feeling welcome here, even as a digital nomad. So I think those were very interesting findings that we had on the top countries, that even though if they don't have a 0% tax rate, if they do have a consistent application system, they're consistent with the stay length, and the income is not, you don't need millions to move to another country, they do rank really well on our index. And then we have the bottom 5 countries. Get ahead of myself, but this one is just very much because of the tax rate that they rank so low on the index, and again also because of the visa process. that is not clear, you might have to go to an embassy. And for someone, and I speak also from my experience, when you're traveling, when you're embracing this digital nomad lifestyle, you have to be really aware of so many things that are changing all the time. So finding countries that are difficult to apply to, that you have to figure out a lot of things, that you have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, you just don't end up going there, or you may just try to enter as a tourist for a couple of days or maybe a month or so and then leave the country because it's so difficult to deal with, on top of all of the other things that you have to figure out while you're traveling. So these bottom countries, I'll just mention them. That's Namibia, Georgia, Cyprus, Greece, and the Czech Republic. And mainly because of the tax rate and, as I mentioned, the visa process.
Estonia is not doing that well either. I believe it's like a seventh, bottom to top or something like that. I suppose, is it because of taxation? What brings Estonia so low? Because it's quite, let's say, a very digital society in many ways.
So Estonia, you have a tax rate of about 20%. You do become a tax resident after 6 months, and that's pretty much everywhere in the world. So the countries that rank higher, you don't become a tax resident, even if you can stay for up to 2 years. So that play like on the downside of Estonia. Their process is pretty easy most of the times. It's online, the information is pretty clear, but it's not so easy to enter the country. And that's why they rank so low on the index versus other countries. It's not that it's it's not like these countries are bad, it's just that they're ranking lower because there's someone better. Estonia is a great choice for digital nomads as well. It has a great community, and there's other things to consider if someone is planning to travel there or to move there. But on the index, there are countries that are performing better than Estonia, especially because of the tax rate.
I was reading, of course, the index. I also watched a webinar that you did to present the index, that you were there yourself, of course, Dr. Per Billund and Christoph Heuermann as well. It was very interesting, by the way. I learned a lot. One question, and please, I very much sympathize with everything you are doing. But you mentioned, for instance, the topic of gentrification, and oh yeah, nomads. First it was tourists, now are nomads that are like sophisticated tourists. It's always, there's always somebody to blame. There are, exceptions, horrible exceptions about that. Horrible in the sense that blaming people for everything, like Barcelona in Europe, that it's a city that it's at war with itself. But just, playing a little bit of devil's advocate. Something that I was thinking after, listening to the webinar that you did some months ago was the following. Of course, the index, let's say, prioritizes a libertarian perspective on tax policy. By the way, a perspective that I totally share personally. But the issue is, could someone make the case that nomads, particularly the ones that are, jumping from one country to the next, every 3 months or less than 3 months, and live completely tax-free, could anyone make the case that they are some sort of free riding the countries that they visit?
Yes, of course, you could always make the case for that, and that's something that I think the digital nomad community has been faced with. But I think it's also important to acknowledge first that, as I mentioned before, it's a privilege to be able to travel and to leave your country, especially people that come from third world countries. I wouldn't say that they're completely free riders, but they are affecting economies in certain ways, and it's important to acknowledge that and to see that so that we can move forward as well. It's not necessarily bad or necessarily good, it's just a reality that it's happening. Again, we used to be nomads way back when there wasn't so many of us roaming the earth, and now there's a bunch of us, and we have internet. We live on this hyper digitalized age, and after COVID, I think we can all acknowledge that something that I do on my country or any place that I am can have an effect on everyone else around the world. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge and understand, that now the borders that we created for countries and for nations are not, we're starting to see that can fade really easily. And because of and this goes into a much deeper conversation, because it's not as simple as saying we should ban digital nomads or we should have harder restrictions, because people are still going to move. People are still going to be voting with their feet. It's something that we saw here in Colombia with Venezuela. It's something that we're seeing in Ukraine, in Europe, and many other cases. And even though they're not considered digital nomads, there are still people who are moving borders and who are bringing different things and affecting economy and affecting society as a whole. So on that case, yes, you can see, you may say that they're free riders, but that will be a very shallow interpretation, because again, this goes into a much deeper conversation. And the first conversation is the economy and the exchange rate and monetary system and central banking, because these people came usually to digital nomads, come usually to third world countries with their dollars or the euros. And then of course, if I have a room to rent, I'll rather rent that in US dollars than to have rent that in Colombian pesos, because I'm going to have a better income for myself and for the room that I have. And that's inevitably displacing people from the places that it used to be. The closest case that I know and that I've lived at first hand is in Medellin. And in Medellin, there's a very popular area called El Poblado. And this neighborhood is really well known because it was really high end, it's really beautiful, and that's where all the nomads ended up getting on the first place. A couple of years ago, maybe 6 years, 7 years ago, I went there with my family, and it was really quiet. Staying at a hotel was very affordable back then. And now, for me, it's nearly impossible to go to El Poblado, and I don't like it anymore because it's really crowded. So you can say like, oh, they displace people and this and so on. But then what we are seeing now in Medellin is that in downtown, in Centro de Medellin, that used to be not such a pretty area, is now being flooded with cafes, with really cool spaces, with co-workings, with rooftops where you can work from. And this area that used to be kind of like abandoned and forgotten up to a certain point, because there's a lot of history there as well, is now having like this new life being flown into it. So I think for someone that doesn't understand how economy works, and for someone who doesn't understand how this rationality behind economy works, it's really easy to say just ban them from coming here, instead of seeing that as in nature we as humans adapt and things have to change. And that's also the market, and I think that's also the free market. The more that we let that go, that's understand that is new places and new areas are going to flourish. And I think that's also where I like about digital nomads, that they're finding places that people wouldn't go to, people wouldn't travel to, because either they thought they were dangerous or not accessible. And now just because there's internet, then you can go and enjoy nature and enjoy a different lifestyle. And I think also challenging that conception of living in big cities and having to work from an office, but realizing that, hey, like, this world is pretty big and there's really amazing people out there that if you give the chance to know, you may learn a couple of things. So this globalization that we live in now, this hyper digitalization, I think is also not only on our computers, on our cell phones, but because of digital nomads, I think there are other things that are being shared that are more, that cannot be measured as well. Because then you have these communities of people talking about entrepreneurship, or they want certain services, and then local people are also accessing that income and improving their lives and improving their surroundings as well. And with everything is also a matter of knowing our own boundaries and honoring that as well.
You estimate that there are 40 million, apparently 40 million digital nomads around the globe. Never, that phrase never applied better. Around the world, literally, and that's interesting. But another thing that you highlight that I think is as interesting is that even though there has been an explosion of digital nomad visas in the last 5 years or so, a small fraction of these 40 million nomads are using them. What do you think is preventing massive adoption?
Well, what we've been discussing, I think the bureaucracy and the process are not so easy to handle. I think also many nomads might not have all the knowledge that they need to understand finances better and to move around better. From some of the informal interviews that we hosted, most of these nomads are moving countries every 3 months, and some of this process can last up to 1 month. So it makes no sense that if you have a really nice passport, like a US passport or a European passport, then you can access a lot of countries as a tourist and live there as a digital nomad. For example, if you come here as a European or as an American to Colombia, you can stay up to 6 months as a tourist, and then you don't have to pay taxes and you don't have to be in the system. And if you see Colombia in the index, we have like a tax rate of 18%, and the process to apply for that visa is just awful. So I think that's what's preventing massive adoption. And I think it's also that fear of being perceived by another country, especially other country knowing your income and how much you earn and where is that income coming from. And it's not like everyone is like, like doing illegal things. Most of these people are working legally. All of them are going to say all of them are working legally and on things that are not damaging, like humans. So I think that's just them preventing that and just moving more freely, because then you just have to get a plane and then move. People who have applied for these digital nomads visas, they're mainly like thinking, oh, I want to stay longer. They come to a country, they see the country is really nice. That's what I've seen also from cases here in Colombia. They come for 3 months and then they fall in love with the country. They want to stay longer. They create relationships. So they're like, okay, now I'm going to apply for the visa because I want to stay for 2 months, but with my status of digital nomad. So I think that's what's preventing massive adoption. Mm-hmm.
And related to the last point you were making, another thing that you mentioned is that many, or at least some nomads, some digital nomads, prefer to remain, quote unquote, under the radar. Why is this exactly? What are the implications, let's say, for the countries that host them and for them as as individuals? What explains this?
This also comes from a free market logic. From the informal interviews that I've had, most of these digital nomads have found the best tax system that works for them, and then they've created a company. For example, I have one case of a person that he renounced his British nationality, tax residency, to be able to not have to be like tied down to the country anymore. And then he created a LCC in Chicago, I believe, or in the US, and he does his invoicing and everything he sells through that company. So he hasn't paid income tax in a while, but this is also the flag theory that Christoph speaks about, and you can also learn more about that on our website. We have the webinar that you were mentioning, and this is what we talk about. This is not only for digital nomads itself, but this is something that is available for everyone that wants to go into the research and find, kind of like shop what's the best tax system for them and their lifestyle and so on, and what are the benefits that they want to have. And I think in this globalization, again, this goes into a much deeper conversation of saying and this can go like, again, much deeper and much longer, of saying how effective are countries. Because what is the role of the government? Is the role of the government to only provide nice roads and safety, or is the role of government to be involved in much more in the country? So something that I found very appealing about the digital nomad lifestyle is that it's actually challenging the government as we know it today and the role of government. Because if just a few nomads can destabilize make a country unstable, then what's going on that country, and what's going on with the expenses, and what's going on with the taxes that people are paying inside of that country. And that goes again into that conversation of saying how productive are our governments with the money that we are paying, and am I able to go and find a better government for myself and my family, or do I want to stay in my country and fight and make opposition to the government to make my lifestyle better, to be able to stay in the home that I love, or the places that I enjoy. So I think this goes into a much deeper conversation of saying you can shop in the world right now, and we have that opportunity thanks to the internet, and this is information that is available for everyone who's up to the task of researching and understanding this better, and not just saying with what we've been told as well. So I think it's a quiet revolution, and we'll see. I mean, right now it's very small, but in 50 years, 100 years, it'll be interesting to see where this goes as well.
Yeah, and speaking about the future, and I know this is, let's say, you can give us probably your guesstimation, because I mean, if you see the future, please let us know. That would be great. We can use your powers for other things as well. But you mentioned about that how the trend, it would be great to observe how the trend will evolve in the next 50 years or so. What about taxation? Do you think that let's say in the next 10 years, in the next decade, you think taxation will evolve somehow? Will maybe, let's say, if we are very pessimistic, it will treat nomadism as some sort of tax loophole, and they will try to cut it, as brutally as they can? Or ideally, let's say, countries will become so tax friendly to the citizens that, let's say, nomadism may happen, but not because of tax reasons, or something in between. How do you see the evolution in the next 10 years or so?
I think all of those things can happen because you have to, and this is also something that we found on our research. And as we've mentioned here, we have a libertarian perspective and a libertarian point of view. And on the proper research that we have found on this topic, it's more on the other side, on saying we need more restrictions, we need more control, we need to know what these people are earning and tax them on that. And that's on the other spectrum, on the political and economical point of view. And there was no proper research around this topic with the libertarian perspective. And that's also what we wanted to talk about this topic and make it more as a research and not only like a conversation topic. Because then when you go online and when you go and research on blogs and social media and influencers and so on, and like that, the more popular information online is more on the libertarian side and perspective of saying, how can you avoid it? How can you be more efficient with your money? How can you have access to like better things and so on? And so I think there are like the two views, and some countries might go all the way in of saying like, we don't want this. This is something that we're seeing in Barcelona, is something that we are seeing in Portugal. And I think it's also something very, I respect their points of view because those are their homes. And if they feel that their homes are being threatened, I think that's also very libertarian point of view of saying, you know what, I'm going to defend my home and I don't feel this is what I need. But each community needs to decide. And this taxation model that we are under, this is influenced mainly by the OCDE, by the OECD, I'm sorry, by the OECD, of saying like the tax residency, you get taxed by the place that you are in. And this is so updated. Like we've been building this tax system for over 100 years. And now that is changing. And I think it's not only the digital nomads that are making those changes, but there are many other things happening around the world that are forcing governments and are forcing ourselves and our communities to understand what works better. And if I'm being taxed, and if a portion of the money that I've been earning with so much hard work, how is that being used to the best? So I think the system needs to change. This OECD, the system needs to change definitely. And I think the nomads might just be a symptom. And again, this digital nomad lifestyle is not for everyone, and it might not be for everyone all their life, because what we're seeing is maybe young people who are being able to travel, to experience the world, to go and like learn new things and also bring new things to different parts of the world. Maybe with time they'll just decide what's the best country for them to live, or where their community is as well. So it might not be for everyone always, but I do think it's gonna just keep increasing because it's gonna get easier to travel. We all have this urge of seeing the world and seeing how we behave, and something that I would like to see, and that's just a prediction that I make from like the next 100, 200 years, is nations are going to stop existing. Countries might not be in 100 years, 200 years. Countries are not going to be like the same concept that we have today. And I'm seeing more that evolution towards more community-based things, more voluntarism, and more focus on the individual, but being part of a greater community. So that's where I see things going.
The debate about, the destructive, impact of nomads, tourists, always, I think, it always, this is like a double column, and it always forgets the other side of the column, because I mean, it's true, let's say massive tourism may raise prices of rent, but on the other hand, there are people who rent those, there are landlords who rent those, and for them it can be life changing. I remember, because many of these, these problems and these arguments recycle. The same was said when Airbnb, in 2016, 17. Oh yes, but now we cannot. It's there are areas in which apartments are unaffordable. Yeah, but somebody is renting that. Somebody, and that person most likely is an owner who lives in the country and is going to do something with the money. It's not that he's going to hide it in a vault and put it underground. So and there are other, like you were saying, okay, an area can become gentrified and another area can start thriving because of that. I remember in my own city, in Rosario, in Argentina, there was a neighborhood named Pichincha that was, it was famous for being the place of crime and prostitution, literally. So as you can imagine, it wasn't a very nice place, and maybe a fun place, but not a nice place. And then construction started, and yes, of course, they tore down some horrible houses that were completely destroyed. Thanks to that, the owners of those houses who didn't have the capital to improve those houses, to rebuild them, made a lot of money by selling to construction companies that made buildings. And that brought a lot of wealth to a lot of people. And of course, more housing for living, more housing for renting, restaurants, etc., etc. So it's never, now we can't pay, it's so horrible. There is a full story that you need to also let develop, and it brings, prosperity to everyone in general.
Definitely. And I think that's just human nature, to be afraid of someone different. And that has been our story, and that has been the story of the wars and the conflicts that the human race has gotten into, and that's because someone is different. So I think this perspective also comes from much more a peaceful approach of saying, when you get to understand someone that's different from you and you embrace that change with like an open, a growth mindset, then that's when we grow. And also human beings, our nature is also through growth, through challenge, and through challenging things. And if everything stays the same, then we wouldn't have evolved. And I think as a human race, we're still evolving. And this part of evolving is also understanding how the structures that we created for ourselves are evolving, and how, especially this phenomenon of the digital nomad, it's also making ourselves evolve. And I believe that the best way to let that flourishing of humans and to bring prosperity and abundance, it's through freedom and through the ideas of liberty. So we cannot like restrict ourselves in so many ways when there's so much to learn from others. And again, like, these people are traveling, they're bringing their perspective, they're bringing their technologies, they're bringing their customs, and when they come to a country, they also learn the perspective, the customs, the history, and then they also take that back home or wherever they are. I'm not gonna say that there's no bad people, because we have seen cases here, especially in Colombia, with sex tourism, of underage girls and boys, that's very concerning. But again, that's a different issue that needs to be tackled with the truth and with a different perspective. So I'm not saying that there's not bad people roaming the earth, because there is evil, and that's something that we also, as libertarians, need to acknowledge. but the best way forward is through freedom.
Before letting you go, just one last question. Let's say it's not very libertarian because I'm going to ask you to profile like the typical digital nomad. Is there something like, like a prototypical digital nomad? Are there certain features? How could you describe it, or not, or it's very varied?
I mean, I couldn't say that. I've traveled a lot to different places, and every time I travel, I meet different people. And so I could not say that there's a stereotypical person that on how they look. Maybe what people have on their minds of digital nomads is probably someone white from a first world country that works in tech. That's like what we see usually. But from my experience and for what I've seen, there's just a whole range of diverse people, and I found that also in digital nomad there's a lot of diversity as well. Yeah, I'll say that. And again, when they come to the countries that are not so advanced, then that's my case. Then I met so many amazing people in Medellin who were traveling, and then they inspire me to also travel and take the leap. And it was something that I didn't think was accessible for me back then, but I now realize, oh no, it was accessible. That's why I also like that income dimension that we have on the index, because it's also, hey, where would be a good first step to go if this is the lifestyle that you wanted? That wouldn't cost so much. But again, and this is also growth mentality and very aligned with libertarians. If you want something, then you can do it. And that's how we see things here.
And I lied to you because I'm going to ask you one more question before letting
That's
you
okay.
go. If particularly if there's somebody who's listening to us now is thinking, oh, maybe some nomadism would be good for me. I would like to try it. What kind of do's and don'ts could you suggest? What are the pros and cons of the lifestyle? What can you say to somebody who's thinking about it but have never tried it?
There's plenty of information out there online, so I'll talk based on my experience firstly. And I'll say the first thing is that you can guarantee that you have a job or an income source that can be mobile, that you can make online. So the first thing that I'll say is have stability on that first. If you want to do freelancing, if you want to work remotely, there's a lot of opportunities out there online. But again, it's a matter of dedicating the time and the effort to finding those opportunities and to grow within that, so that when you're traveling, you're not stressed that you ran out of money, or if you have like money saved and you want to like take the leap of traveling and then figuring that out as you go, I'll say just be smart with your money and your finances first. I think that's where things come. And then the second thing will be to go to a country that will be easier for you to travel. I've traveled as a young woman on my own, and that comes with a whole set of things that you have to care for and that you have to be aware. So do your research, and the last thing will be to find community. Once you get to the place, or before you get to the place, on the co-working spots, or there's a bunch of events around digital nomads. And if you're in a city that there are digital nomads, try to go to an event as a local, because I think that's also very nice when you are traveling and then there's people in the country that are excited and eager to meet you and to share with you, because then you also learn from that. So if you're a local on a country or on a city that has digital nomads, try to find those events and go and ask them the questions as well and start building that community. It's something really beautiful to do. And the last thing that I'll say, shameless plug, as I say, will be the Liberty International World Conference. This is a Nomad conference because we host it in a different place every year, and you get to meet local people, but you also get to meet all the amazing folks here at Liberty International who they have been traveling their whole lives. This is a organization that is over 80 years old, so you get people who have been traveling everywhere through this conference. So it's also a nice way to make that first step of traveling through conferences. And we're going to have our next one in Argentina this year. It's going to be an amazing opportunity. And from the trainings departments, we also have some opportunities of traveling. So if you're interested in that, you can come to Liberty International and travel with us, and then you get the hang of it and feel more comfortable to start doing it on your own.
Thank you very much, Maria Alejandra, for your time, and it was a pleasure really talking to you about this. Congratulations on the Nomad initiative that you're running through Liberty International. Liberty International, by the way, that's an amazing job. So thank you again for your time, and to everyone who listened to this, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find this podcast on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube at We Are Innovation and Somos Innovación, where you can find not only the podcast, but other material that we are producing. And see you next time in the next episode of the We Are Innovation podcast.
Thanks for watching this episode of the We Are Innovation podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To know more about We Are Innovation, visit weareinnovation.global.